Marcy picked her way carefully along the path to the latrine, a large cabin set back from the others in a clearing surrounded by a grove of trees. The rain was starting to let up a little, but there were still little streams of water running down the path, reflecting the beam of her flashlight. She entered the building and flicked on the lights by the door. Water had found its way into the cabin. It was puddled up near the entrance and by the showers. She walked around it to the bathroom stalls, slipped out of her slicker, entered one of the stalls, and put the flashlight down at her feet. Steve had obviously neglected to repaint the bathrooms in his rush to make sure everything was operable. The inside walls of the stall and the surface of the door were covered with graffiti left by former campers. 40 yards to the outhouse by Willie Make It, Marcy read. She grimaced. Come on, kids, you can do better than that. She checked to make sure the seat was clean. Well, she thought, this will probably be tomorrow's detail. Steve would probably have them in here scrubbing down the floor and the stalls again after the rain, and painting over all the old graffiti, which would only provide a fresh, clean, irresistible surface for the new campers who would arrive at the end of next week. She wondered what the point was. People were going to draw on walls no matter what you did. It was a way of saying, I was here. Some called it vandalism. Others labeled it inner-city art. Like a writer she saw on The Tonight Show who said it was, what was it? A new form of urban abstract expressionism, or something like that? But the bottom line was that people, especially kids, needed attention. A way of making their presence felt. A way of marking out their turf. Adults got to put personalized license plates on their cars, signs with their names on their houses and front lawns and mailboxes, personalized checks, engraved business cards and stationery, brass nameplates on their office desks, and plastic nameplates on their office doors, initials on their briefcases, and monograms on their pocket handkerchiefs. It was all the same thing, more or less, a way of establishing your identity, of saying, this is me, I did this, I was here. It's most common in big cities. Graffiti is rarely seen in small towns, and when it is, as in this case, it was probably done by someone from the city. In small towns, identity was not much of a problem. People knew each other. They took the time to say your name and say hello. In a big city, you often got lost in the crowd. The best attempt at a solution to the problem she had ever seen was in a bar she went to once. Getting in by borrowing a girlfriend's fake ID. She had a couple of beers and then went to the ladies' room, where she found that the walls were made of blackboard slate. There was a tray with chalk, so people could write whatever they wanted on the walls, on the theory that it would always be erased. But someone had wanted to leave a message with more permanence, so she had scratched her initials and a date into the slate. You couldn't win. People simply had to do it. Maybe that was why they did it. Because you couldn't win. They had to scratch their initials into trees, make footprints in wet cement, spray paint their names on highway overpasses, often coupled with the names of a boy or girlfriend. It was a way of making their presence felt in a world where no one took the time to get to know them. Initials in a heart. We were here. We did this. We lived. We loved. She thought of Jack, of his slim, strong body, the feel of his warm skin, his lips on hers, the way he felt inside her. God, she had wanted him so much. All the time they'd known each other. Every time they'd almost done it. Come so close that they had both ached with the need for one another. All the time she pulled back when she really wanted to tear his clothes off and attack him. She wondered if she had been his first. He certainly hadn't acted as if he was uncertain or inexperienced. But then, would a guy admit it if he was? No. She guessed that Jack probably had girls before, and the fact that he hadn't rushed her made it that much more special. She wondered if he knew she was on the pill. He'd never asked her, but he probably assumed she was, figuring she would have said something if she wasn't, although she knew girls who didn't use anything, but didn't let that stop them. Stupid. She wondered if he had thought she was a virgin. In fact, she wasn't, though she had not been on the pill when she had done it the first time. It hadn't been smart, and it certainly hadn't been special. It was long before she met Jack. She had only been 15. The experience left much to be desired. Some of her girlfriends had talked about saving it for when they got married, or at least for the right guy. But that idea had always bothered her. How did you know? How did you know when it was right? How could you know if it was really good with someone that you cared about if you had no basis for comparison? And she had no desire to wait until she got married to have sex. Sex was sex, and love was love. And the ideal situation, of course, was when they went together. But you had to know how to tell the difference between the two. Even so, just because you loved someone was no reason to marry them. It might be a reason to have sex, but it took more than desire to make a marriage or even a relationship. It seemed like every second or third marriage nowadays was ending in divorce, and she didn't want to be a part of those statistics. The first time had been okay, but that was about all she could say for it. Afterward, it hadn't seemed like a very big deal at all, and that was probably why she had felt so disappointed. It should have been a big deal. Some of her older, more experienced girlfriends had told her about orgasms, about what they felt like, about how incredible it was. She had gotten wet, but she didn't know that wasn't it. She remembered thinking, okay, so that's what it's like? Well, now I know. She knew there had to be much more to it. She started taking the pill 8 months ago. She had frankly expected to have sex with Jack long before this, but she always found herself pulling back at the last moment. It probably wasn't fair to him to get him so hot all those times and then stop just before they passed the point of no return. But then it wasn't just a case of her getting him all hot and bothered. It worked both ways. She felt the frustration, too. She cared for him. She cared for him a lot. But she didn't want to give in to the feelings of the moment, only to lie there afterward thinking to herself, okay, so that's what it's like with him. Well, now I know. Hell, if a girl just wanted to get laid, it was the easiest thing in the world, especially if she was pretty and had nice tits. She just picked up a fake ID, teamed up with a girlfriend she could trust, and hit some bar where she could be sure you wouldn't run into anyone from school. Or she could go to any one of a million places where you could get hit on by older guys. Christ, it happened all the time. You got hit on in supermarkets, for God's sake, and in record stores, and just walking down the street. And these days, you didn't even have to wait to get hit on. You could pick out some guy who looked nice, someone who wasn't an obvious sleaze, and you could make the moves yourself. She knew some girls who did just that, who even made a point of going after married men on the theory that they wouldn't hassle you because they had much more to lose. But that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted more. Much more. She didn't want a short interlude of heavy breathing and temporary pleasure. She wouldn't settle for just feeling good. She remembered, after that first time, talking about it with her more experienced girlfriend who had said, "God, wasn't it great? Didn't it just make you want to do it with every foxy guy you know?" She had said yes, because the conversation seemed to call for it. But she hadn't meant it. What she had wanted to say was, "Yeah, well, I guess it was sort of nice. But is that really all there is?" And, "No, it doesn't make me want to do it with every foxy guy I know. It made me wonder if it's any different with somebody who loves me. With somebody who wants to be inside me, not just my body. It made me want to do it with somebody who'd carve our initials on a tree, leave behind more than a memory, a statement. We were here. We did this. We loved." She hated to think of them being apart after this summer. She felt very close to him right now, but she wanted to feel closer because of what they'd shared. It was funny, in a way. For as long as they'd been together, there was always that pressure, that slight tension about when it was going to happen. Not if it would happen, but when. There hadn't been any question in her mind about the if for quite some time. And now that it had happened, she felt a pressing need to get even closer to him, to become a part of him, especially since they were going to go their different ways after this summer. She just wished she could peel back the layers of his mind and look inside, see and feel what he was really thinking, have it written on the wall of her memory. We were here. We loved. She thought she heard the squeak of the door opening, and she pushed the stall door open and peeked out. "Jack?" No answer. "Jack? Is that you?" She got up and left the stall, looking around the bathroom. There wasn't anybody there. It must have been the wind, pushing the door open, she thought, or maybe just her imagination. She went over to the sink to wash her hands. She turned on the faucet. Nothing came out. She sighed and made a face into the mirror. She stared at her reflection for a moment and made another face at herself. "When I looked into that mirror," she said, doing Katharine Hepburn, "I knew I'd always be ugly. I said, 'Lady, you'll always be plain.'" She giggled and then stopped as she heard a footstep behind her in the shadows near the shower cabins. "Hello?" she said, feeling a little self-conscious. Nothing. She shrugged and tried another faucet. Still no water. Irritated, she struck the faucet with her fist. It didn't help. Great, she thought. That's all they needed. No water. She bent down to look under the sink and saw a cutoff valve on a T-fitting just below the pipes. "Aha!" she said, crouching down and turning the valve. There was a cough and a sputter from the sink as water began to rush from the faucet. She straightened up and washed her hands, wiping them on her t-shirt, then turned the water off. As she did so, she heard something behind her again. She turned and stared into the shadows at the far end of the bathroom, near the showers. "Ned?" It would be just like Neddy, she thought, to come popping out at her in his Indian headdress, waving a tomahawk or something. "Hey, come on, you guys," she said, walking slowly toward the showers. "Ollie, ollie, in free!" She approached one of the curtained shower stalls and pulled a chain on a light fixture hanging overhead. She reached out and grabbed the curtain, then abruptly yanked it open. It was empty. There was a slight drip coming from the shower head. She stepped inside and twisted the faucet tighter, shutting off the drip. She pursed her lips and moved back, looking at the second shower stall. Was the curtain moving? She reached out and took hold of the curtain, hesitated, then jerked it back. Empty. She sighed. Must be my imagination. Outside, the rain started coming down harder. It sounded like pebbles hitting the roof. It seemed as if the sound was getting louder. She thought of her dream, the rain turning to blood, and a shiver ran down her spine. She turned, not seeing the shadow that suddenly appeared on the wall. The shadow of an axe being raised. She turned and saw a face twisted into a horrifying grimace, a look of sheer, terrifying insanity. Eyes wide and bulging, lips twisted in a snarl. She saw the axe now, held high, saw it coming down. For a brief second, everything switched into slow motion. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She saw the arm beginning its downward swing. She saw the steel blade coming directly at her face. She screamed, a scream that was cut off as abruptly and as violently as it had begun, cut off as it tore from her throat. The steel blade struck her face, and she felt the numbing force of its impact. That and nothing more. Just one incandescently brief, agonizing blow as it was buried in her forehead, splitting the skull, biting deep into the cranium. She was already dead as she fell back against the wall of the shower cabin, blood running down her face. The axe embedded in her forehead like some macabre Halloween prop. But the blood was real. It streamed from the deep gash and pattered to the floor like raindrops, running in red streams down the drain. The overhead light swaying crazily back and forth as the door was opened briefly and a gust of wind blew through the bathroom. The door swung closed and everything was quiet again. Only the light fixture swung back and forth, briefly illuminating Marcy's body slumped in the shower stall. Then it gradually stopped swinging, leaving her in darkness.